June 28, 1941, 7 days after Operation Barbarossa, somewhere near Minsk, Belarus. Obergefreiter Klaus Hartmann crouches behind a knocked-out BT-7 tank, peering through smoke at Soviet infantry retreating through burning wheat fields. The Red Army soldiers are running, panicked, disorganized, abandoning equipment. One drops his rifle and keeps running. Another throws away what looks like a crude metal pipe with a wooden stock. Obergefreiter retrieves the weapon later that afternoon. It's heavier than it looks, 3.6 kilograms unloaded. The receiver is stamped metal, spot-welded in places, almost crude compared to German manufacturing precision. The barrel shroud has holes drilled through it. The stock is rough wood, barely sanded. It looks like something assembled in an automotive shop, not a weapons factory. "Look at this Russian garbage," Hartmann says to his squad, holding up the submachine gun. "Sheet metal and wood scraps. This is what the Soviets arm their soldiers with?" The laughter stops 6 months later, when Hartmann's unit faces a Soviet counteroffensive at Klin, northwest of Moscow. Through the December snow comes a sound he'll never forget, a distinctive rapid burp burp burp, as Soviet infantry advance firing 71-round drum magazines at 900 rounds per minute. Hartmann and his squad, armed with bolt-action Kar-98K rifles and one MP-40 per squad, are pinned down by volume of fire they can't match. The PPSh-41, 6 million produced between 1941 and 1945. Crude, simple, unstoppable. And by 1945, over 55% of Soviet infantry would be armed with submachine guns, many of them PPSh-41s, giving them firepower superiority that would drive through Berlin's shattered streets. The Germans laughed at the sheet metal burp gun. Then they started capturing them, then converting them, then issuing Wehrmacht's field manuals explaining how to use them. The PPSh-41 became so ubiquitous among German troops that Berlin had to designate captured examples officially. MP-717R for unconverted guns, MP-41R for those converted to 9mm parabellum. The weapon that Germans mocked in 1941 would storm the Reichstag in 1945. And Klaus Hartmann, if he survived, would have stopped laughing long before then.
The impetus for the PPSh-41 came from brutal lessons learned during the Winter War against Finland from November 1939 to March 1940. The Red Army entered that war expecting easy victory. Finland had 3.7 million people. The Soviet Union had 170 million. Numbers would prevail. They didn't. Finnish ski troops, armed with Suomi KP-31 submachine guns, annihilated Soviet formations in forests and built-up areas. The Suomi fired 9mm rounds at 900 rounds per minute from 71-round drum magazines or 36-round stick magazines. Finnish tactics emphasized mobility, surprise, and overwhelming firepower at close range. Soviet infantry, armed primarily with bolt-action Mosin-Nagant rifles, couldn't respond effectively. The Red Army did have submachine guns, the PPD-34/38 and PPD-40 designed by Vasily Degtyaryov. But these were expensive, complex weapons requiring skilled machinists and precision tooling. Only elite units received them. Regular infantry made do with rifles. The results were catastrophic. In battles at Tolvajärvi, Suomussalmi, and Kola, Finnish forces inflicted casualties at ratios exceeding 5-to-1. Soviet generals filed desperate reports. "We need submachine guns for infantry combat in forests and urban areas. Rifles are inadequate for modern close-quarter warfare." But the PPD-40 cost too much to mass produce. It required approximately 13.7 hours of machining time per weapon. The receiver was milled from solid steel. Components required hand-fitting. In 1940, only about 81,118 PPD submachine guns were manufactured. Total. The Red Army needed hundreds of thousands, millions eventually. In September 1940, The People's Commissariat of Arms issued requirements for a new submachine gun perform as well or better than the PPD-40, but be adaptable for mass production, including in non-core enterprises, meaning factories that had never built weapons before. Two designers submitted prototypes, Georgy Shpagin and Boris Shpatalny. Both were experienced, both understood the requirements, both knew that simplicity would win. Shpagin's prototype, completed in August 1940, used stamped metal parts extensively. The receiver was sheet steel formed with simple bending and welding. The barrel shroud was perforated steel tubing. 87 components total versus 95 for the PPD-40. Estimated production time, 7.3 hours versus 13.7 for the PPD. The prototype worked reliably. It was adopted on December 21, 1940 as the PPSh-41, Pistolet Pulemyot Shpagina Model 1941. But Hitler invaded before mass production could begin.
On June 22, 1941, 3.8 million Axis troops invaded the Soviet Union along a 1,800-mile front. The Red Army, caught by surprise despite multiple warnings, collapsed in many sectors. Entire armies were encircled, millions of soldiers surrendered, thousands of tanks, artillery pieces, and small arms were captured or destroyed. By December 1941, German forces had captured Minsk, Smolensk, Kiev, and much of Ukraine. They stood at the gates of Moscow and Leningrad. The Soviet Union had lost most of its industrial capacity west of the Urals, including weapon factories producing PPD submachine guns. During 1941, only about 90,000 PPSh-41s were manufactured. The weapon had just entered production when factories had to be dismantled and relocated east to avoid German capture. Production began in a network of factories around Moscow, each making parts or subassemblies for centralized assembly. But the German advance forced relocation. The ZIS automotive plant, Skechmak stamping facility, Kirov aviation plant, Kovrov plant, all evacuated eastward, literally loading machinery onto trains while German artillery shelled the outskirts. Some production moved to Vyatsky Polyany machine building plant, far beyond German reach. Georgy Shpagin himself relocated there, appointed chief designer. Production in 1941 was pathetic compared to need. 90,000 PPSh-41s. The Red Army fielded 5 million men, one submachine gun for every 55 soldiers. Then, Soviet industry did what Soviet industry did best: mass production through simplified design and total mobilization. By spring 1942, PPSh factories were producing approximately 3,000 units per day. Soviet production figures for 1942 indicate output of almost 1.5 million units. 1.5 million in 1 year, from factories that had been producing barely 90,000 the year before. How? The PPSh-41 was designed specifically for mass production by unskilled labor using available materials. The receiver was stamped from sheet steel, no milling required. The barrel was often made by cutting 7.62 mm Mosin-Nagant rifle barrels in half, 2 PPSh barrels from one rifle barrel, after rechambering for the 7.62 by 25 mm Tokarev pistol cartridge. The components were standardized. Tolerances were loose enough that no hand fitting was needed. Workers with minimal training could assemble weapons in hours. Factories that had never built firearms before, automotive plants, stamping facilities, even agricultural equipment manufacturers could produce PPSh parts using existing equipment. The drum magazines were manufactured separately. The 71-round drums were complex mechanisms, spring-loaded, requiring careful assembly, but they could be produced in dedicated facilities while rifle assembly happened elsewhere. By late 1942, PPSh-41 production reached full scale. Distribution expanded from elite units to regular infantry. Initially, 1 or 2 submachine guns per squad.
By 1943, entire platoons equipped with PPSh-41s. By 1945, more than half of all Soviet infantry carried submachine guns. The tactical implications were profound. A Soviet rifle squad with 5 or 6 PPSh-41s could deliver 4,500 to 5,400 rounds per minute combined cyclic rate. A German squad with 1 MP40, 500 rounds per minute, and 8 KR-98K rifles, manual bolt action, maybe 15 rounds per minute per rifle, could deliver maybe 620 rounds per minute if every soldier fired continuously, which was impossible with bolt-action rifles. In close combat, urban fighting, forest battles, trench assaults, the Soviets had overwhelming firepower superiority.
The PPSh-41 wasn't elegant, it was functional. Caliber 7.62 by 25 mm Tokarev. Weight 3.63 kilograms, 8 pounds empty. Length 843 millimeters or 33.2 inches. Barrel 269 millimeters or 10.6 inches, chrome-lined. Rate of fire 900 rounds per minute. Effective range 150 to 200 meters. Feed system 71-round drum or 35-round box magazine. The action was simple blowback, open bolt design. Pull the trigger, the bolt flies forward, strips around from the magazine, fires, blows back, and repeats until the trigger is released or ammunition is exhausted. No gas system, no complex locking mechanism, just a heavy bolt, a strong spring, and momentum. The compensator on the muzzle, that distinctive slotted shroud, reduced muzzle climb during automatic fire by about 70% compared to the PPD-40. It made the weapon more controllable, improving hit probability despite crude sights. The sights were basic. Early models had adjustable tangent sights, calibrated to 500 meters. Optimistic for a submachine gun. Later production simplified to a 2-position flip sight, 100 meters or 200 meters. Soviet doctrine didn't emphasize precision. Volume of fire at close range mattered more than individual shot accuracy. The drum magazine, that iconic feature, held 71 rounds, giving PPSh-41 gunners sustained fire capability unmatched by any other infantry weapon except machine guns. But the drums were heavy, 1.84 kilograms loaded, difficult to load properly, and less reliable than box magazines. In November 1943, drum construction was improved by increasing metal thickness from 0.3 millimeters to 1 millimeter, which improved reliability but further increased weight. Many soldiers preferred the 35-round box magazines, lighter, 0.68 kilograms loaded, more reliable, and easier to carry. But the psychological impact of that 71-round drum, the knowledge that a Soviet soldier could fire continuously for nearly 5 seconds, was considerable. The nickname PPSh, meaning daddy, emerged among Soviet troops, a term of affection, reflecting the weapon's reliability and protective firepower. German soldiers had a different name, burp gun, because the rapid cyclic rate produced a distinctive sound, not the slow chug, chug, chug of an MP40, but a faster burp, burp, burp that announced Soviet presence unmistakably.
Early German attitudes toward captured PPSh-41s were dismissive. Propaganda photographs from 1941 show Wehrmacht soldiers examining captured Soviet weapons with condescension.
Crude sheet metal construction, rough wood stocks, loose tolerances. This represented inferior Soviet engineering, proof of Slavic backwardness. That attitude changed rapidly as combat experience accumulated. German infantry, equipped primarily with Kar 98K bolt-action rifles, faced Soviet units increasingly armed with PPSh-41s. In forest fighting around Moscow, Leningrad, and Rezhev, German squads were suppressed by volume of fire they couldn't match. The MP-40 was excellent, but only one per squad. 5 or 6 submachine guns versus 1 creates overwhelming disadvantage. German soldiers began picking up PPSh-41s, at first informally, battlefield trophies carried by individuals, then systematically, with captured weapons issued to units that needed more automatic firepower. The problem? Ammunition. The PPSh-41 used 7.62 by 25 mm Tokarev rounds. German logistics didn't supply that ammunition. Capturing Soviet ammunition stocks worked initially, but wasn't sustainable. Berlin's solution was pragmatic. Officially adopt captured PPSh-41s and supply compatible ammunition. The Wehrmacht designated unconverted PPSh-41s as MP717R and supplied them with 7.63 by 25 mm Mauser ammunition, dimensionally identical to 7.62 by 25 mm Tokarev, but slightly less powerful. German-language field manuals for using captured PPSh-41s were printed and distributed. Soldiers were taught loading, clearing malfunctions, field stripping for maintenance. The PPSh-41 became quasi-standard issue in many units. But the 71-round drum magazine, the PPSh's most valued feature, created logistics problems. German ammunition came in different packaging. Loading 71 rounds into a drum designed for Soviet packaging was time-consuming and error-prone. So Berlin instituted a conversion program. Approximately 10,000 captured PPSh-41s were converted to 9 by 19 mm Parabellum, standard German submachine gun ammunition. Conversion required a new barrel, chamber work, and a magazine adapter allowing use of MP-40's 32-round magazines. The converted weapons were designated MP-41R. The conversion reduced cyclic rate from 900 RPM to approximately 750 to 800 RPM with the less powerful 9 mm round, but it solved the ammunition logistics problem. Ironically, this removed the PPSh's main advantage, the 71-round drum magazine. Converted MP-41R guns used 32-round MP-40 magazines, matching the capacity German soldiers already had. The conversion's purpose was logistic simplification, not tactical improvement. Yet German troops continued using PPSh-41s, both converted and unconverted, throughout the war. Period photographs from Stalingrad, Kursk, and the retreat westward show Wehrmacht and Waffen-SS personnel carrying PPSh-41s. By 1944-1945, some German units had more captured Soviet weapons than German-issued ones. The weapon they'd mocked in 1941 had become essential to their survival by 1944. The Battle of Stalingrad from August 1942 to February 1943 demonstrated why submachine guns dominated modern urban combat. In rubble-strewn streets, collapsed buildings, and room-to-room fighting, engagement ranges rarely exceeded 50 meters. Often combat occurred at 10 to 20 meters, across a street, through a doorway, in a basement. At these ranges, rifles were awkward. Submachine guns ruled. Soviet doctrine emphasized submachine gun saturation. Entire assault squads armed with PPSh-41s would storm German positions under covering fire from Maxim or DP machine guns. The overwhelming volume of fire, 5 or 6 PPSh-41s firing 900 rounds per minute each, suppressed defenders while assault troops closed to grenade range. German defenders, often equipped with 1 MP-40 per squad, plus bolt-action rifles, couldn't match that firepower. They needed machine guns in fixed positions to hold,
but fixed positions were vulnerable to Soviet artillery and infiltration. Combat reports from Stalingrad document Soviet tactics. Red Army assault groups consist of 6 to 8 men, nearly all armed with submachine guns. They advance under covering fire from snipers and machine guns. When they reach grenade range, approximately 30 meters, they throw grenades simultaneously, then immediately assault while defenders are suppressed. Volume of fire from 6 to 8 submachine guns at close range is overwhelming. Our troops cannot respond effectively unless they have prepared machine gun positions. The PPSh-41's 71-round drum gave Soviet assault troops sustained fire during the critical seconds of an assault. They could suppress an entire room or building corner with one magazine, then assault while defenders were pinned. By war's end, Soviet assault doctrine was refined: lead with artillery, suppress with machine guns and mortars, assault with submachine gunners, consolidate with riflemen bringing up ammunition and support weapons. The PPSh-41 was the assault weapon that made this doctrine work.
Production of PPSh-41s peaked in 1943, with approximately 1.767 million units manufactured. By 1944, production decreased slightly as the PPS-43, an even simpler stamped steel submachine gun designed by Alexei Sudayev, entered production. The PPS-43 required even less machining time and fewer materials. It became the preferred weapon for some applications. But PPSh-41 production continued. In 1944, 7 factories produced PPSh-41s. By 1945, only 3 remained as manufacturers shifted to the PPS-43. Small-scale production continued even in 1946 and 1947, though by then the AK-47 was in development. Total production: approximately 6 million PPSh-41 submachine guns between 1941 and 1947. 6 million. The most produced submachine gun in history. For comparison, Germany produced approximately 1.1 million MP40s during the entire war. The PPSh-41's production numbers alone changed infantry warfare. When 55% of your infantry carries automatic weapons capable of 900 rounds per minute, tactical calculations shift fundamentally. Assault tactics become viable that would be suicidal with bolt-action rifles. Defensive positions require different organization to survive submachine gun assaults. The Germans understood this. That's why they captured and converted PPSh-41s, despite having their own excellent MP40. They needed more automatic firepower, and Soviet production had flooded the Eastern Front with millions of submachine guns.
By April 1945, as Soviet forces encircled Berlin, PPSh-41 production had exceeded 5 million units. The Red Army's infantry was the most heavily armed with automatic weapons of any force in history. The assault on Berlin showcased why. Urban combat, building to building, room to room, floor to floor, required sustained firepower at ranges under 50 meters. Soviet assault teams, armed predominantly with PPSh-41s and PPS-43s, stormed German strongpoints with overwhelming automatic fire. Photographs from Berlin in May 1945 show Soviet soldiers posing with PPSh-41s on the Reichstag steps, in front of the Brandenburg Gate, amid the ruins of Hitler's bunker. The weapon had become iconic, inseparable from the image of the Red Army infantryman. The Germans who had laughed at the crude, stamped metal weapon in 1941 weren't laughing in 1945. Many were dead. Others had spent years fighting against, and sometimes with, captured PPSh-41s. They understood what Klaus Hartmann learned at Klein in December 1941. Firepower matters more than manufacturing precision. 6 million crude submachine guns defeat 1 million perfect ones.
The PPSh-41 didn't end with World War II. It spread globally. China produced the Type 50, a direct copy, by the millions. Chinese Type 50s armed communist forces during the Chinese Civil War and Korean War. North Korea produced the Type 49 variant and gifted one to Stalin on his 70th birthday in 1948. Vietnam used PPSh-41s and Chinese Type 50s extensively. The K-50M Vietnamese variant, modified with a shorter barrel and wire stock, saw action throughout the Vietnam War. Hungary produced the 48M variant in the early 1950s. Poland manufactured licensed copies as the PM-WZ-41. Romania, Iran, Albania, Cuba, Laos, dozens of nations produced or used PPSh-41 variants. American troops faced PPSh-41s 3 times: Korea, 1950–53, Bay of Pigs, 1961, and Vietnam, 1960s to 1970s. In each conflict, the distinctive burp sound announced communist forces. The weapon remained in service through the 1950s in Soviet forces, gradually replaced by the AK-47. But satellite states and client nations continued using PPSh-41s for decades. Examples were confiscated in Iraq as recently as 2003, 62 years after the weapon entered production. Today, PPSh-41s appear on war memorials throughout the former Soviet Union and Eastern Europe. The weapon symbolizes the Great Patriotic War more than any other Soviet small arm. Not the Mosin-Nagant rifle, not the PPS-43, but the PPSh-41 with its distinctive drum magazine and perforated barrel shroud.
Stalin allegedly said, "Quantity has a quality all its own." Whether he actually said it is disputed, but the PPSh-41 proves the principle. The weapon wasn't perfect: heavy, crude manufacturing, poor accuracy beyond 100 meters, drum magazines were finicky, rate of fire consumed ammunition rapidly, and prone to accidental discharge if dropped. But it worked, reliably, even in Russian mud, snow, and sub-zero temperatures. It could be produced in automotive factories by unskilled workers. It could be maintained with minimal tools. And it provided firepower that changed infantry tactics. Germany produced better submachine guns. The MP-40 was superbly engineered, but Germany produced 1 million. The Soviets produced 6 million PPSh-41s. In urban combat, forest fighting, and assault operations, 6 million crude weapons beat 1 million perfect ones. The Germans learned this lesson through brutal experience. They started the war mocking Soviet engineering. They ended it issuing field manuals for captured Soviet weapons and converting PPSh-41s to German ammunition because they needed automatic firepower that their own production couldn't provide. Klaus Hartmann, who laughed at the crude stamped metal weapon in June 1941, spent the rest of the war hearing that distinctive burp 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 in his nightmares if he survived to have nightmares. Most didn't. Of the 3.8 million German soldiers who invaded the Soviet Union in June 1941, only about 1.4 million would return. They faced many weapons: T-34 tanks, Katyusha rockets, Soviet artillery, winter. But the PPSh-41, 6 million of them, in the hands of soldiers who learned that volume of fire compensated for individual shot precision, played a role in their defeat that shouldn't be underestimated. The sheet metal burp gun stormed Berlin, and the laughter died somewhere between Moscow and the Reichstag.